Hey! Hello everyone! Today I will not only cover Flutter development but also UX and UI design and how we can improve our collaboration with the design team. But before we start, I will present myself briefly. So I'm Aloïs, I'm a French Flutter freelance developer, and I also like to contribute to open source and to the Flutter community in general, which led me to become a Google developer expert, which I'm very proud of. On my free time, I also like UX, UI design, drawing, and playing music. I'm currently working for a company named ClickUp. We are building a product named ClickUp as well. The purpose of the product is to improve productivity inside companies by making it easier to create process and to collaborate with the various teams inside your company. So don't hesitate to try the product at clickup.com and don't hesitate to send us feedback. Okay, let's dive into the topic. Before starting, you may wonder what is exactly a design system, and I will try to give you my definition. My definition, not really, in fact, I only extracted this from the InVision blog, and I find that it corresponds quite well as what I imagine when I'm talking about a design system. So a design system is just a library of basic building blocks and standards that you will reuse to create applications. I will switch to Figma to show you an example of a design system. So let's start with this example. So before we start, I'm in Figma. Figma is a great tool. I highly recommend your design team to work with it because it works in real time. So it's really great for collaboration. And it's also a great tool for designing. They also can use other tools like Adobe XD or Sketch, for example, but this one is my favorite personally. I even created all of the slides that we've seen just before inside of Figma, so it's very versatile too. Okay, so let's take this example. This is a custom shop for Vikings, so they can sell their products. And I imagine 2 pages like this, so a designer could give you this, the development team. And you can see that it has a specific layout and specific navigation, and we will see that it can be a problem. After more basic stuff like UX researches, workshop with the end user, they will produce some more refined design like that one. This is in fact a prototype of what the development team must implement to create the application. But that not only provide you the screen of the application, they also provide you a prototype of the design system. So, like I said before, it's a library of components and standards. They could also write something in a document to explain what the design system is to make things clearer for you to implement. But it's at least that. So the things are separated into layers. The most basic one at the top and the more complex at the bottom here. In the top category, you can see the most basic resources, which are colors, the text styles, the spacing values, the corner radiuses, the shadow, and all these elements will be used inside the app. This allows you to have a consistent experience. This forces the designer to reuse these components and to make sure that every one of the screen is consistent with the others. And it will also help us implement the design system actually. So you have the color. You can see that each resource has a specific name. So you have the color with the name here. You have text styles with specific names, title 1, title 2, title 3, paragraph, and so on. And for the color, it's the same. You have accent highlight 2, and the various other color that you will have inside of the app. You can also have the icons with their name too, and you have the images too with specific names here too. So these are the most basic resources. Then you will have a bit more complex components, which are in fact composed of multiple basic atoms, as I named them. Here, for example, the button is composed of a text style, an icon, color, border radius, and spacing. So you can see that everything that composes this button is in fact defined just in the layer above. And it's the same principle for all components, so you can have multiple layers of components like this, and you end up with the actual pages from the app. The designer can even prepare an interactive prototype for the app with Figma, so the developer can understand well how the app should work and how the user should interact with the app. For example, here we have something that is a scroll view. We can understand that this area is scrollable, that the bottom bar stay fixed on the screen, and you can try interactions. I will restart so you can see the initial state. We can see that we have a bottom bar with a notification bar that the user can close it. You can see that we can interact with a product tile to get to navigate to the detail of the product, and that's it. You can navigate back. So it really gives you a better idea of what the app should look like when implemented. Same for the filters at the top. Let's switch back to the slide. So how could we implement it with Flutter now? You may guess multiple things. In Flutter, we have three main libraries to implement our apps. We have the Widgets library, which is in fact just the most basic widgets, and they are generally neutral and not too tied to a visual experience. You have the Google Material Design implementation, which is in fact a more advanced design system with more components and more rules. You also have specific theming mechanisms too. And finally, you have the Cupertino, which mimics the iOS look and feel. I won't cover too much Cupertino today because I think it's too specific in most cases. Let's start by studying material design. It's probably the one that everyone will go when he starts Flutter application, and for a reason. You have a lot of learning content about it, you have a lot of components, you have everything to make you create an app very quickly. So it's probably the easier to use when building an application. But if you use it for the app I just showed you before, you may find that it can be difficult to implement such an app with material design. Because, for example, we don't use the regular list styles, we have a specific header on our home screen, we have a very specific notification container, we haven't a material bottom bar, and finally the designer doesn't want us to create a ripple effect. So you may wonder which part of material are relevant now in this app. If I want to summarize material design and material library in Flutter, I would say that it allows you to build app really quickly. It has a lot of advanced built-in widgets. It covers accessibility and it has responsive visual components too. So it's probably the best option when implementing most of the apps. But I find several drawbacks. You can have different naming conventions between your design teams and the material design system, because it already have a theme with specific names, and your design team may not have thought it the same way. They could, for example, a title could have been named header, and you have to switch between the two conventions to make sure everything is working as you expecting. It's doable, but it's always more complex. I find it also hard to tweak sometimes. It's hard to modify the visual appearance of several widgets, and it can be an issue for specific pages. And finally, I find it that it can be boring because more and more apps are using material design, and you have the same ripple effect, you have the same pickers, and so on. And I find that all apps have tendencies to look the same, in fact, because of this. So it can be dangerous for that, in my opinion. The second option is to build your own material design system equivalent from scratch by using the most basic widgets from Flutter. This means that you will have to re-implement all of the theming area with colors, typography, and so on. But you will also have to re-implement a lot of components so that they match what you have in your design system prototype. This also means that we will try to stick to the widgets Dart library, and we will avoid the material library. The advantage of this approach is obviously that everything can be customized. It also allows you to respect the design prototype naming conventions that the design team has defined. And obviously too, the drawbacks are it will ask you to do a lot more work, and it will be really difficult to maintain since you will have to follow the Flutter evolution. How can we choose between one or the other solution? In my opinion, you can go with material design system when you're working on small projects or prototypes, or on projects which the design systems has been thought around material design from the beginning. This ensures you that you will use the same conventions, the same principles that are in the material design system. Even if material design system is very generic, it has, like I said, a few things that are fixed and standardized, which can be a good thing. But I really think that the design team should learn this before doing the design system for your app. On the other side, for big projects which require long-term support and a very specific and customized visual experience, or with potentially multiple apps with a shared design system, I would go with a completely custom design system. I find it really clean to have a standard for your company, and you're sure that everything is really customized for your products. You can also eventually mix the two solutions. Just be careful to not create a messy code base by using the concepts from both design systems. I will try to explain you how I implement this kind of custom design system, at least an example, a very simple example, by taking the design system I showed you before. For this, we will use one of the most basic widgets from Flutter, which is the inherited widget. I'm sure you know stateless widget and stateful widgets, but maybe you never created your own inherited widget yet. And that's the widget we will use to create the theme of our app. So the shared resources, colors, and so on in our app. I will show you why. The first thing I have to say is that inherited widget is everywhere in the framework. When you're using the theme from material design, you're in fact using an inherited widget. The same for media query too, for example. It's really one of the core mechanisms behind Flutter. So it's really a simple, basic, and very well tested widget in the framework. So what is an inherited widget? An inherited widget is a widget that can be accessed from any one of the descendants of this widget. So you can access it from the context, from its build method. It allows you to share data with the whole widget tree. And as you could imagine, it's really useful for our use case. We will be able to share our colors, our typography, and so on with the rest of the other widgets from our apps. And the other great thing about inherited widget, it can notify any of the widgets that read it of a change. So it will automatically trigger a new build from these widgets. And this is great for theming too, because we will be able to notify of a temp change, for example, when switching from light to dark, and all of the widgets will be updated automatically. To implement this, I generally create a dedicated class to store all of the resource values. So I start by creating a simple Dart class, which is named app_theme_data. You can even split this class into smaller one to make things more organized. For example, I like to create a class for the colors, a dedicated class for the typography, for the images, and so on. The only thing you have to make sure is to implement the equal operator and the hash code, because this will allow us to compare our instances by value and to notify the other widgets very easily just by comparing instances. To implement this, I will highly recommend equatable and or freeze, which makes things a lot easier to implement. If you create a data class like this, it will be really easy to implement an inherited widget. An inherited widget just extend inherited widget class, and you have to store the app data as a property. Add a static method named off to make things easier to access this widget from the descendant widgets, because it will be used almost everywhere, so you don't want to call depend on inherited widget of exact type everywhere in your code base. So we make enough static function to make things a lot quicker to invoke. And finally, don't forget to implement update should notify, which will notify every one of the descendant widget of a change. So here we just say that if one of the properties of our data changes, then we have to notify the descendant widget of a change so they can rebuild themselves. And let's see how I implemented this with Flutter. So this is how I do this kind of design system, how I implement it. So I first start by creating a dedicated package for all of these resources and components. This allows me to reuse it in other apps, for example. It's very handy for that. And it forces me to have something that is not tied to an app logic too. So I find it really great to have an isolated part for the design conventions. And this way we can easily share it or test it. So inside my package, I have a directory named theme, and inside of it I have a subdirectory named data. And this subdirectory, I have all of the data I just show you in the slides. So the root one is named app theme data, and I have a property for each one of the children data classes. Yeah, also like to create a factory to create a default theme data. You may create one for light or dark theme, for example, and other variants to make responsive implementations easier. So if I go to the color data class, you can see here that in fact it's just an equitable implementation with a property for each one of our design system resource. And if I go back to the design system, you can see that everything matches with the color names that the designer gave us. So this allows you to really respect the naming conventions between you and the design teams. And finally, I have a factory to create an instance with the colors that we have here. And we could have a second factory for a dark theme, for example. It's quite the same for all of the resources from the theme. So we have the same thing for icons, images, border radius, shadows, and spacing, and typography, obviously, with the text styles. Maybe the only specific thing is you may wonder how I created a specific icons, and for that I used a plugin for Figma named Icon Font Exporter, which is very handy. It allows you to export a TTF font file that you can import in your package later. Okay, one thing I'll also like to do is to create really basic widgets that are just on top of these resources. For example, I like to create specific gap widget for Flutter. Gap is a package, an external package, and it's just an equivalent of a sized box, but it detects the direction of a flexbox. So in a row it will be an horizontal spacing, and in a column it will be a vertical spacing. Just a quick way to create spacing, and I created a widget that only read the current theme value from the off static function and then return the widget. For example, I like to do the same for the app text. So it's a specific text widget for our app, and I created factories for all of the styles from the theme, and this way we don't have to read the theme for every one of the text from our app. We just invoke this widget instead. So it makes things even more simple to implement. And last thing I wanted to show is the golden widgets. If you're not familiar with golden widgets, it's unit testing, and you will be able to render widgets as image from a command line. So it will allow you to verify that your theme renders correctly. So you can generate an image like this from all of the components from your design system. And I find it great. So I generally build a library. So it's just a regular widget, which stack all of the sections from our design system and print them as a vertical layout like this. And this is really handy because you can share this image in a PR, for example, or with the designers, so that they can validate quickly the rendering part of your design system implementation. If I have to summarize, I would give you those tips. The first one is to align your naming conventions with the design team. This improves a lot the communication and avoid styling mistakes. And it's better to improve the productivity of your development team. The second one is to create a dedicated package for your design system, because if you want to reuse it in other projects, you will be able to. The third one is to use golden tests when implementing a design system so that they can be shared easily with other people. The number 4 is to create base widgets like the gap or the app text, so that layouts are really simple and clean and a lot easier to analyze when you come back on your code later on. Number 5 is to use packages when possible. They can solve really complex problems or things you wouldn't have enough time to implement yourself when implementing an app. So don't hesitate to look if a package can simplify your work. And the last one is to use tools to improve the collaborations and the assets export process from your design team, because it's something you will have to do on a regular basis. So I highly recommend you to find the right tools to accelerate the process behind implementation. We have our theme with all the colors and so on, but now how can we implement the actual screens of the app and all the other components? So they are, in fact, simple widgets. Like any of the things that you would implement with material, it's the same for our custom theme. You will just have to make sure that you're using the theme, that you don't have magic numbers or colors that are defined into your build methods, but most of your widgets will be just regular Flutter widgets. For example, here I'm implementing the price label at the bottom, and it's just a container with a row with a specific box decoration and a text and an icon. So you just use your theme to create more advanced widgets, and that's it. Obviously, several widgets will be more complex. If I take a button, for example, you have a lot of logic behind it, the user interactions, and how you have an over effect, you have really specific behavior. And for this, I highly recommend you to check out the material design implementations to extract what is only relevant for you. So for example, the ink response widget from the material design has a lot of logic regarding the current state of a button. For example, all of this, you can see that it defines shortcuts. You have a focus management, a mouse region to handle the cursor on desktop. You have semantics, and you have a gesture detector to handle the tap. So all of this can be complex to reinvent. So I recommend you to always see if you don't have a quite similar widget in the material design library. And I will show you how you can implement this widget. So I generally put them into my design system package, and I put them into a widgets subdirectory. And if I take the price label we had before, you can see this. You have something like this, but the most advanced part is the button. So what I like to do when implementing a widget is I like to split it into two parts. So the first part handle the logic, the interactions, and so on. And what I call the layout part is just the visual layout of the components I implement. This allows you to test it really easily. So I will show you with the product tile, it will be clearer. So what I like to do is to separate my widgets into two parts. So I have one which manages the states inside of your app, for example, the tab management with the users. And I like to have a second one which manages only the visual layout part. So here I have a product tile layout, and I say that the product tile layout can have two states, one idle and the other is over. Those one matches what is defined is our design system. If I take the two here, we have an over variant and an idle variant. So the naming conventions are the same between my layout implementations and with the design prototypes. So I generally define just a layout widget, and then on top of it I have my actual real working widget which uses this layout widget and adapts it regarding the current state of the app. Here I use an app tab builder for the user interaction, and this is just what I show you with ink response. It's just a simplified version of the ink response widget from material design. And you can also use golden tests. So like I said before with the theme, golden test allows you to render your widgets as images. So here, for example, with the product tile, I'm rendering it as images to validate that the layout is corresponding to the initial prototype and that the colors and so on are well. Again, this can be shared in your PR or with your design team, and it allows you to test that your widgets are responsive. So it's very handy for that. Okay, and finally your app. I like to structure my app like this, but that's not relevant for the presentation. But if I take the home screen, for example, it's in fact just a view which is composed of basic widgets, and that obviously uses the theme that we define in our design system package. But it's also a regular widget. Several tips for this part too. Really, you should always read the material design widget implementation first before going into your own widget implementations. Like for the theme, I recommend you to respect the naming conventions from the design team. Here, for example, we have an idle state and we have also an over state. So this makes communication easier again. Don't forget accessibility to make your components responsive. It's something that can be easy to forget because we don't have the same issue as other people. Finally, every one of the tips I showed you are just personal preference, but I really like this when switching from a design system from Figma to an implementation in Flutter, because you really can see the transition between the design system and the Flutter implementation. And also it allows you to test your various layout in a quick way and to render the various states without having to simulate tabs on user interaction. So it's just a bit more of effort to implement, but it's a lot easier for a lot of things later on. Obviously, I just show you a small part of the implementation. If you want to go deeper into the design system, the example design system, I highly recommend you to check out the source code you can find on my GitHub. And you will also find a link to the Figma design file from here. So don't hesitate to go there and to ask questions on the issues from the repository if you want to. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and the other presentation so far. I let you with the other Vikings. I'm sure you will learn a lot of things today, so have fun and goodbye.